you, Sian. Yeah, so I'm Stephen Crawford, and I work for the training department at WPF just part-time, and yeah, very pleased to welcome Anastasios here this morning. He's had connections with WPF over a few years, going back a little way. We worked a bit together when he had the role of link tutor from the University of Roehampton, collaborating with WPF and helping us with our programs. So it's very nice to welcome him back this morning, and he still has a role with WPF as a supervisor on master's program dissertations. But let me introduce him for you. So he's a relational psychoanalytic psychotherapist. He has worked as a senior lecturer in the university sector at the University of Roehampton. He currently has a position at Regent's University, where he's involved in the counselling psychology program, teaching psychoanalytic theory. He's mainly these days working in private practice, but I guess today's lecture arises out of a book that he's edited and produced, which is called The Sublime in Everyday Life, Psychoanalytic and Aesthetic Perspectives. And it's really about that he's going to be talking to us. So I'm delighted to welcome Anastasios for this lecture. So over to you, Anastasios.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody today to the to today's event. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you an introduction to how the book came about, and also an overview of the different themes that we are addressing in the book, and hopefully bringing also some clinical vignettes that will illustrate the points that I'm trying to make. This will, I hope to do this for about 50 minutes, and then since we are a group which is small in size, I hope that we'll have a more interactive experience. I will welcome your questions, and if you have something that you want to be clarified, please, I don't want to talk, all the way through for 50 minutes. If you have something urgent that you'd like to ask me, or something this needs to be clarified, please raise your hand and and tell me, well, I don't understand this, or please could you clarify this, and I would be very pleased to do so. Now to start with the book, this book was first conceived by a colleague of mine, a colleague and a friend. Her name was Dr. Tess Adams. I was working with her at Goldsmiths, and she was herself a psychoanalyst and an artist. And she was the one also who introduced me to the love of aesthetics and art myself, although I always had a love of literature and film myself, but the love of fine art was something that was introduced by her. She was the one who started this project, and she brought me in as a way of collaborating together. But unfortunately, in the process, she had dementia, and she was not able to finish the project. So, it was left for about 5 years unfinished, and unfortunately, she passed away as well because of Alzheimer's and dementia. And I was left with the project in a way, as a way of trying to honor her memory and trying to complete the project on her behalf too. I realized, of course, I couldn't do it alone. I needed some help, so I recruited my co-editor, Polona Kirk, who I edited another book in 2007 on narcissism, and we edited the book together. She was really instrumental in helping me finish the project. So I'm really grateful for that. But as this book was something that was mostly a project conceived between friends and colleagues, and it was executed and finished as a way of honoring the memory of Tessa, and also bringing a dear colleague and friend, Polona, to finish it. So already you can see that this is, being a relational analyst, for me is important to emphasize the importance of intersubjectivity and collaboration and co-construction, that I'm not in the process of only doing things alone. I always think that, the best work is done through creating it and constructing it with others. Even when we're writing our own chapters or we produce our own thoughts, we are always in dialogue with someone else. Always in dialogue with people before us, and always people who are with us, friends or colleagues, and people who will perhaps will hope or think we will meet in the future. So there is constantly this sort of intersubjective dimension that happens in any act of creation, in my view, including the creation within the therapeutic space. So this is a little bit of the history and the background. How and this has become an important book, and finishing this book and we finished it just before the pandemic started as well. So it was right on time, and of course, for a year we went back and forth with Routledge trying to edit it, and eventually was published in January this year, 2021. But it finished and was submitted in a year before. So the pandemic delayed a little bit its publication, but we are happy I was really happy to get it out, also as a way of completing something that started almost 10 years ago. And having it submitted and seeing published was very emotional for me, especially for my, as a way of keeping my promise to my friend as well. So this is the book. The book focuses on the sublime, but not simply in its philosophical sense as something which is of something that is extraordinary, something that can be encountered only in very special and unique moments outside of the realm of the ordinary or the everyday, or something that can be experienced in absolute loneliness and separation from others, but quite the opposite, as something that is part of our everyday life. We experience it as part of the texture and structure of our everyday lives, and usually in the presence of others. And that's why we wanted, in a way, because there is a kind of untamed, wild quality to the sublime sometimes. We wanted to tame it and domesticate it and make it part of our everyday lives. And that was part of the project And this was part of the agenda in a way, how to make it something that is part of ordinary encounters with others, with nature, with art, and not something that is extraordinary and out of and wild and untamed. And I think that was the objective of the book. Now, part of this objective was also, just to start with a brief introduction to the philosophical and psychoanalytic sort of theory that underlines the sublime. So we aesthetics was always for philosophy was the inferior sibling of philosophical inquiry. In many ways, it came as a third always to reason and ethics. So philosophy always has reason and logic and ethics as its primary concerns, as aesthetics seems to be a kind of the inferior poor sibling in a way that comes third as something that needs to add to the dominance of logic and reason and the ethical sort of substance that it needs to be based in reason. So questions of truth and questions of ethics, of what is good, what is true, what is good, and then lastly, what is beautiful or sublime come at the end. But it was unavoidable that on some, after the Enlightenment, with the rise of Enlightenment reason and the sense of reason as the primary sort of function of the mind, in a kind of post-Cartesian universe, that mind and reason were so dominant, aesthetics needed to be brought in as a way of dealing with our everyday sensuous body and how we perceive the world, our likes and dislikes, our tastes, the way we encounter the world through our sensuous sort of, how the world hits the body and how the body registers the world in a way. So it's as Terry Eagleton said, aesthetics is the discourse of the body. And for that, always occupied a less sort of prestigious place in philosophical sort of understanding, at least at the beginning of Enlightenment philosophy and subsequently. You can see that also in Hegel, in Kant, in Descartes, in all the kind of major philosophers of the 18th and 19th century. There is a sense that aesthetics doesn't come into the picture until the very end. And there is something similar that is happening, I suppose, in psychoanalysis. There is always, I think in psychoanalysis, there is always emphasis either on epistemology, questions of knowledge, or ontology, questions of being. But questions of aesthetics, questions of what constitutes beautiful or sublime, they're left, as a kind of the preoccupation of a few analysts, but not a lot. So if with Freud and Klein we have, a kind of dominance of epistemological questions, what it is to know, how can we know, and what constitutes knowledge. And later on with Winnicott and others, we have questions of ontology. It's not so much about knowing; it's about being. It's how you are together with someone, how you are with your being, what sort of what is your fundamental sort of place in the world in terms of your ontology. There are few analysts, including Bion and Melzer, who address questions of aesthetics. What constitutes beautiful, what is beautiful and what is ugly and what is sublime in the interactions of the psychoanalytic couple, the psychoanalytic diet. And I think Melzer especially was the one who wrote extensively on this. And someone also who belongs to this Bionian or post-Bionian tradition, Civitarese, also wrote on the sublime. And of course, we can we can omit in psychoanalysis the central place of sublimation. That for psychoanalysis, sublimation becomes a very obvious way of hopefully moving away from the immediate raw concerns of sensory and emotional experience and transforming them into sexual drives for Freud, and transforming them into some cultural or other goals that that could animate the body, can animate, and our drives and our emotions can animate this, but eventually the outcome will be something which will be productive, work-related, cultural related. So it will be elevated from the level of the body to the level of culture. So sublimation seems to be of central concern here. Now, and that's perhaps there is something about this that is the product that we aim in psychoanalysis, how to turn our everyday sensuous and emotional experiences into something that is creative, productive, effective, something that moves us into the direction of working together, being together, and you know, enjoying as much as we can. But there is so sublimation becomes of vital importance for the psychoanalytic project. But I think there is something about the preoccupation again with the aesthetics and the sublime that seems to not occupy the central place in the questions and the questions and the ways that psychoanalysis thinks as such in terms of its project. And that's what we wanted also to bring into the book, how the sublime can be encountered in psychoanalytic practice, as well as in our encounters with our everyday encounters with nature, with each other, with life as such. So we thought that it would be we thought just to give you a kind of idea, we thought that it would be useful to start with these questions of differentiating, you know, of the philosophical sort of distinctions that you find in aesthetics between the beautiful and the sublime, and to move through the different philosophers who address the question of sublime, starting with Kant, moving to Burke, and from Burke moving to more contemporary ones like Adorno and Lyotard. I will not go into great extent into the distinctions that they make, and they all problematize the difference. There is, starting with Kant and Burke, there is a kind of very clear distinction between the beautiful and the sublime, and moving later on to Adorno and Lyotard, these distinctions are unsettled, and they don't seem as clear as they appeared in Kant and Burke anymore. Just to mention that, you know, fundamentally, the beautiful is something that doesn't quite unsettle, but brings a sense of consistency and coherence to one sort of subjectivity, the encounters with what is beautiful. But the sublime seems to be something that is unsettling, something that produces a sense of awe and terror. But on some level, what happens with that awe and terror is that we experience it from a safe distance. So we are able then to take it in and transform it into something that empowers us to conceive both how small and inferior we are to these powers of nature, or the power of something, you know, gigantic like a mountain, or a storm, or, you know, the notion of infinity, the mathematical notion of infinity, how it makes us feel small and insignificant. But at the same time, because we are experiencing it from a safe distance, we are able to take it in and transform into something that empowers the subject and gives it a renewed vigor and power. So it's not simply something that is terrifying and fills us with dread. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to conceptualize it and appropriate it for Kant and Berg. It would be something that, you know, it has to be. We wouldn't be able to conceptualize it. We'll be in the middle of it. So imagine watching a huge storm, but from the safety of a good shelter, right? Of course, you feel the power of the storm and the destructiveness of the storm, but you're not in the middle of it. If you're in the middle of it, the only thing you will need to think is how to find some safe place to survive. The only way you can experience the sublime is from the safety of the shelter, that your life is not threatened. You're not filled with dread. You're not overwhelmed by it. So again, you know, making links with psychoanalysis is like the dread that we might experience in encounters of the dread, what Bjorn calls a nameless dread in a way. If we are in the middle of it, if we are in the thick of it, there is no way of processing it, of feeling its effects, unless we put ourselves, we're able to contain it, we're able to name it and create some distance between ourselves and it in order to experience it in experience its power, but not be destroyed by it. Right? So there is something about then you can only experience the sublime in its immense power if there is if your subjectivity is not in danger, in real danger, right? Or even imagined one. So you need some containment of anxiety in order to be able to experience the sublimity of something. Otherwise, it becomes terrifying and destructive. And of course, you know, this is also the question of that goes right to the heart of the question of trauma. Okay, you can't really be able to process trauma while it's taking place, or while you are experiencing its post-traumatic effects and the huge sort of the huge impact that it has, emotional turmoil that brings into your life. The only way you can do it is by revisiting it gradually, you know, trying to turn the volume down of that emotional turmoil in order to be able to gradually, you know, integrate it into your life. Otherwise, you are constantly sort of terrified and by its effects, and that ripple throughout your life. So in a way, you know, again, the efforts that psychoanalysis makes is a form of containment and holding in order to be able to create some safety, relatively safety, in order to be able to experience this in a way that with someone else, with another mind and another body in the room, so as not to feel that the trauma of what you experienced this time can be witnessed, can be made more manageable, its effects can be reduced, so as to be able to perceive it and incorporate into your life. Otherwise, there is no way that you'll be able to go through it. The only way to deal with it is usually through some dissociative or other defenses that keep it, or denial or dissociation, so as to keep it away. But these, of course, they are not effective in the long run, as we know from dealing with clients who experience trauma. So this is something that we know as practitioners we experience again and again in our sort of our practices, whether we deal with trauma and how you deal with its effects and its consequences and its emotional impact, how you have to reduce it, minimize it, in order to be able then to to process the trauma and work through it. So there is always a way that, you know, with the sublime, there is something terrifying, dreadful, that produces, you know, a sense of awe and terror. But at the same time, you know, if you're not safe to experience it, then it's simply a very destructive force. The only way that you can experience its impact, you know, is from a position of safety. Now, I think this is a kind of very classical notion of the sublime, which we were trying, as I said to you, to domesticate, to make it something that it doesn't need to be always so terrifying, so dreadful, and so overwhelming, but something actually that can have not only a kind of a negative force that needs to be contained, dread that needs to be completely sort of fenced around. So it's a kind of wilderness that becomes a kind of a wilderness park in a way, that we can put a fence around and make it, you know, make containable. I think there is something about the sublime that can have a positive impact, can have something that can, you know, apart from filling you with dread and terror and, you know, a sense of inferiority or a sense of immense sort of immensity and infinity, and leaves you with despair and dread. It is encountered in everyday life in smaller doses and in ways that they do not contain the same impact. They don't have to be thought as dreadful and terrorizing, but I would like to think of them as a moments of grace. How we meet, how in our everyday interactions we meet people, or we encounter events, or we have certain that leave a certain impact in our lives, that they can be quite transformative. And I associate that with experiences of that surprise us, that descend at us, but not in a way that they are catastrophic and they fill us with dread, but they give us a kind of a little sort of inkling of what else, what more can exist from what we think is out there. The encounter with an otherness, with something else that we haven't thought about, we haven't perceived, but also we haven't experienced. We haven't experienced before. So is encounters with this more, with this other, with this sense of being a kind of surplus, that it doesn't need to be terrifying, it doesn't need to be something that completely shocks us and tears us apart and leaves us completely powerless. It doesn't need to be traumatic, it doesn't have to have this, but actually it can be quite transformative. It's not simply something negative, something that can lead to the subject's destruction, but something can, like Laplace used to say, detranslate our current translations and lead us to form new narratives about who we are and how we relate to others, right? So there is something about, we have certain ways of viewing and being and thinking about ourselves in the world, and gradually these experiences come and create an opening, introduce an otherness that make us feel that we have to open up to a different perspective, to a different view of the world, to a different view of the other, and that in that moment we get an inkling of something that is more, that what is different, what is, and that more in itself, it doesn't need to be something traumatic and terrifying, but something that actually unsettles us, but not in a catastrophic way. It's unsettling, but only I would call them moments of grace. You know, a moments not of shock and terror, but moments of grace, and that is again what I think is sublime. I will give you an example. I remember as a young man, I was doing my university psychology degree, and I remember falling in love, as you do, and I had I had a relationship for about a year, and unfortunately didn't work out, and we split up. And I was very low in mood, and very, for a couple of months I felt very, very low. I really didn't want to end the relationship, but it wasn't working, and I felt really bad, really awful. I was feeling really, 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 low in mood and depressed. So I was sitting in the university bus stop, waiting for the bus to. I was studying at the University of Canterbury, waiting for the bus to arrive to take me to the city. And I remember a very, an old lady at around, I think must be in her late 70s, early 80s, and she saw me and she approached me, and she touched my hand and said to me that, in life, say, don't be sad, my don't be sad, my son. In life you will experience an equal amount of sorrow and joy. And the bus came, I went in and left. So out of the blue, here she is, a complete stranger coming to me without knowing me, touching my hand and saying this in a very sort of gentle and, beautiful way. I would say sublime way. Opening up, and I was completely sort of taken by surprise. I didn't expect that. And, don't worry, in life you will experience an equal amount of joy and sorrow. And the bus arrives, I get into the bus completely bewildered by what happened and leaving. But from that moment on, it felt like a new perspective was introduced, something that my sorrow was lifted, that nothing is permanent, not even our worries, right? That I didn't need to see this as a permanent sort of moment of sorrow, something that will not be lifted, because once you are in it feels like it's never going to end. So the moment of that, as I call it, a moment of grace, this moment of touch, both, the slight physical touch on my hand, but also touching me with what she said, and her concern and care for me, from a complete stranger, opened something up, another perspective, something that, for me, lifted something. And of course, gradually lifted me out of my sorrow and my sadness, and enabled me to engage with the process of mourning in a way. So I think this is what I mean by, little moments of opening something up that allows you to see something more, something different, a new perspective that happen in every day, and they happen often, usually, and we take them for granted and we don't even pay attention. They usually involve an encounter with an other, whether this other is that old lady for me or someone else, or could be, it doesn't need to be another human being, but another would be a natural phenomenon, something that I remember also during the pandemic. In last winter, I had this robin that visited my garden every morning, and that in itself opened up something for me. It's almost like, for 3 months, this old robin will come and visit the garden. For me, it will be a kind of invitation to an opening up of something. Well, there is something else in the despair that what we experienced, and especially during the second lockdown. There was this opening up of, well, there is life, there is hope, there is something else. There's something else here that, that we can still hope for and wait for at the end of this sort of horrible tragedy that we experienced. A moment of hope, a moment of grace. And for me, that was very important. And I think also, going back to Tessa and how, in a way, how the book has started. I remember, because I live in Whitstable, and she also lived here. She had a studio here, and she was doing her art in Whitstable. But we were commuting together in London because we were colleagues, and we were working together at Goldsmiths during those days. I mean, that was 15 years ago. And I remember there was a lot of work being done on the A2, and there were a lot of roadworks. And it was so frustrating, especially in the morning with the traffic, with the roadworks. There were a lot of delays. And I remember I was driving the car, and Tessa was sitting next to me, and all of a sudden she says, "Oh, look, Anastasios." I said, "Look at, observe, look." I said, "Look at what? I mean, there is nothing to look at. There is so much traffic here. I'm so irritated, frustrated. We're going to be late for the lecture." And he said, "Well, look how beautiful this landscape is." I said, "What landscape?" And there are only roadworks here. And she started explaining to me the way that these sort of traffic cones were laid out, and the pylons, and the way that you can see that as a kind of art object. And I thought, oh my God, I never thought for one moment that this sort of configuration of, I can only see my frustration and my utter despair in being stuck in traffic with all these roadworks. And I cannot see the roadworks as themselves representing something, beautiful and quite sublime in the moment of encounter, more than simply my own sort of frustration and about the functional logic that I had. Well, I need to get there on time. And of course, I needed to get there on time. I was running late and I was stuck in traffic. And how to overcome this moment of frustration and observe something that, even in its absolute simplicity and its functionality, it also can be beautiful. And that for me opened, in these moments of, how our gaze can be fixated on only one perspective, and there is only one reality, and the other realities, they go missing. And I think this is where also I think that's a very important lesson I've learned in terms of psychoanalysis, that, usually, there is a problem. There's a problem with our clients, and clients, patients, however you call them. There is a problem in terms of having a kind of view of reality that is, this is reality. There's one perspective, and there is not another one. This is how things are. This is how they are represented, and I think there is an ability to imagine or to introduce another reality. There is not just one, but there are different realities that there's not just one interpretation of the world. There are different realities. And for this to happen, you need a certain opening, and that can be introduced to the relationship. I think, I can't quite remember, but I think it was Ogden that said there is, for human pathology is the inability to dream. The sense of to dream, to imagine that there is something else, to metabolize a very concrete and fixed reality into something that has possibilities. Yeah, and I think this is where this moment of possibility, this moment of oh yes, I don't need to think of this just like that. There are other elements that I can add, subtract, edit, and make, create a different narrative. It doesn't need to be only this narrative fixed and concrete. There are different, realities here, and that I can imagine and I can think of that I haven't thought before. And this for me, and that happens in therapy when something is coming in this moment of reverie, also in the mind of the analyst, that is able to open something out of the blue, of course. That, in this moment that you don't see it, and you introduce it, and it might make no sense initially to the encounter. I remember with one of my clients, I had, she was talking to me about the relationships he had with with her boyfriend, and how horrible and devastating it was for her, and that she always does that. She always repeats. She finds men who are emotionally unavailable to her, and she wants to change them, and fundamentally, she always ends up, paying the price for it and being heartbroken at the end. And while she was talking, I think I went to a place where I started, I heard the music. I was listening to a song in my mind. It was Bob Dylan's "Tangled Up in Blue," right? And I was songs like "Tangled Up in Blue," and I said, well, I just say I want to share this with you. I just have this constant sort of thing that comes to my mind of this song. I don't know where it's coming from. This "Tangled Up in Blue" it comes up again and again. Whenever you mention these relationships you have with these men, and and for her it was like, and she said, well, that brought her into kind of memories of being in the sea and with her father, and how her father was unavailable to her, and she was trying to get her attention, and the father would never be able to give her the attention she wanted, and she tried harder and harder, and she was swimming in the sea, and she was saying, look, Daddy, how great I am in terms of my, I can swim, I can do all of these things, and her father would never pay attention to her. So there is something about the blue, Tangled Up in Blue, that opened up something for her, something else, and which created an association for her. But in many ways, it came to me, in this moment of, I don't know, of complete surprise, without me paying attention to, almost like it will feel like I wasn't paying attention to her, but it wasn't that. It's not that I wasn't paying attention, but something else was happening at the same time as I was paying attention to her. And this moment of listening to this song, which of course for her was not a familiar one, but in many ways the very idea of Tangled Up in Blue created something that opened up a further association in her mind and related to her life. So these are the moments, I said, of things that we are able to take and move us out of the concrete experience, and be able to make and enable us to make connections, links, open up different realities, and connect us to something that is more and expansive, not simply reductive and bringing us down into one reality only. So this is one example. Of course, the one that I'm also engaging with, and I've written in the book, is the experience of love, both in our everyday lives, but also in the analytic diet. There is something about the experience of love, as is something that, in a way, it depends on the love, of course, we experience. And in my chapter, I try to distinguish between different types of love, between romantic love and the love of how is considered by the philosophers, how is considered by the poets, and how love is something that in psychoanalysis there is a lot of always talk about aggression, hate, and sexuality, but love seems to be something that is always seen as something as a transformation or sublimation of the of the erotic, and is not considered in its own right, and how it's again these moments of grace, but also these moments of taking us out of ourselves and actually connecting us with something that is more, with the other, connecting us with something that escapes the simple sort of addictive or narcissistic pleasure that we get out of our own projections, but connecting us with not what the other person represents to us, but who the other person is. And that is the difference as well. And I think that between the what and the who. Are we in a relationship only for what the person represents to us, or for who this person really is? And there is something about this, of course, that there is a mixture of both in every relationship. And of course, we can never be in a relationship simply in, acknowledging and accepting the otherness of the other in its pure otherness. Of course, there is some narcissistic sort of satisfaction and gratification we get out of this too. But what is the priority here? Which takes precedence? And I think more and more we encounter relationships that there is something about this narcissistic sort of sense of what the other represents to us as ourselves, and not the otherness of the other, and which takes us out of our own sort of self-enclosure and into what the other person is. And I think therapy and psychoanalysis especially is a form of connecting to that otherness, of that sense of who the other person is, and keeping in check your own narcissistic gratifications as much as you can. Of course, it's not possible, but it's what I think is something about this otherness that and the connection with it that creates these moments of sublimity, the sublime, and opening up a new perspective. And of course, these moments can also come from encounter with clients when when you're introducing your own subjectivity sometimes in terms of what they think, in moments where they only think of you as a certain person, a certain object, a certain sort of place in their fantasy, that you are playing a certain role, a certain function, for lack of a better word, we're just part objects in a way for them, and we just perform a certain function. But how do we move from this functionality, this sense of being just a function, to seeing us as and vice versa, of course, but to see us as another subject, moving from being part object to another subject? How this subjectivity can come into the room in a way that can create intersubjectivity and not just the subject-object sort of dynamic. And this is fundamentally part of the relational preoccupation of how you bring subjectivity, the subjectivity of the analyst, not as an intrusive presence, but something that can open up the transference and move it beyond the subject-object dynamic to the encounter between two subjects. And this is a challenge. It is a very difficult challenge for both the analyst and the analysand. So for me, these are very important sort of elements and distinctions, and there is a lot of scope here for thinking about how one goes about bringing this. I remember in an encounter with a client, there was this sense that I always represented for her this. I was completely sorted. My life was absolutely sort of intact. That she was the one who had problems, and of course that gave her the entitlement to perform these envious attacks constantly against me as a because I was seen as this sorted, wonderful. Everything was beautiful and wonderful in my life, and in her life everything was wrong and horrible, and she couldn't. And of course, there was a lot of envy and a lot of attack towards me. But however, I also thought on some point that there is something about these attacks. There is something about looking at her life and there was a real deprivation and a real sense of trauma that permeated through her life, which didn't enable her to see the other, either as someone who was who was themselves deprived, and or someone who was superior, someone who was, she constantly placed people in hierarchies, placed people either they are better off than me, sorted, wonderful, or they are, like me or worse than me, and they are damaged, wrong, something wrong with them, etc. So there was this moment where I felt after all these attacks, I wonder how does it feel? How do you think I might feel when when you constantly bringing all of these sort of elements of attack about my life, about who I am, about what you think I am, and how you think I might experience this, a sense of, who I am in this, and how you think I might feel when you are doing this. I said, I never consider your own feelings. I said, she said to me, I never thought that you even feel anything about what I say. I think you are there and you're not supposed to experience or feel anything. But I'm surprised that you said that to me, because I never thought that you felt anything. And she said to me, I always thought that you were someone who didn't care and didn't feel anything and would not be hurt by this. That's why I'm doing this. I'm just venting it in order to get a reaction. So it felt like at that moment she could see that my subjectivity came into the room as someone who could be hurt, and also on some level cared enough to be hurt by her. Right? And that was something that introduced another dimension into the relationship, that for the first time she could see me and not simply the fantasy of who I was, or the function I was playing as an analyst. On some level, at that moment, I became another subject who had feelings I could be hurt. And of course, it didn't mean that, I'll stop being that function for her, because, she stopped and she continued, and she stopped again, and then we were able to go back and forth in this dynamic between doer and done to, and, and the kind of moments of meeting, which we had quite a few of those, but the dual-done dynamic was never completely sort of overcome, but we're working towards it. But there is these moments of how you meet the other, and to meet the other as another subject, not simply as a function, which of course I think is the primary focus of analysis. And it's a moment of love, it's a moment of recognizing the other, of meeting the other as other, and realizing that you and your own agenda is not the only thing. There's something else that you need to meet, and something that fundamentally cannot be completely known either. Something that remains a mystery, something that remains also something that you not completely capture and know, but something that can always exist and always surprise you. And that this is the thing about love is, I think in moments of love where when we meet the other, there is something about it that remains always enigmatic, remains strange, remains a mystery, and we cannot quite capture it. That's why there is this sense of wanting to engage with it, because it connects us with something more than ourselves. It takes us out of ourselves and wants to connect us something more, instead of always bringing us back to our own self and our own sort of substation. I think I'll stop here, because I've been talking for a long time, and I give you a kind of flavor of a lot of things that we're touching in the book, both in terms of art, aesthetics, philosophy. There are a lot of other elements there there are contributors who talk about film, literature, philosophy, and of course clinical practice. So it's quite an interdisciplinary book, bringing a lot of elements in, aesthetic and as well as psychoanalytic elements, and creates this, hopefully gives you an impression of how the sublime can be encountered in these different sort of disciplines, and how it's also encountered within our psychoanalytic practice.
thank you very much, Anastasios. So we can now move into some discussion. Any questions or comments that any of you have that you might like to open up? And you can, as Sian said earlier, you can just sort of put your hand up and I should notice you and invite you to speak. So anybody got something they want to start with? Okay, Theo. Yeah, unmute yourself, Theo.
I think that's me unmuted. Yeah, Anastasios, I loved it. Thank you very much. It gave lots of thoughts and ideas that I've been grappling with for a long time already. There's much I can say. And I just, while you were speaking, I was just jotting down words. And if I flicked back through my pages, the first thing that stood out to me was where you talk about aesthetics as the poor sibling, you know, and how that made me think of like aesthetic has to do with the heart, whereas logic and ethics got to do with the mind.
Yeah.
You know, and so it took me to the sublime is something that we know through the heart, not through the head. You know, it's an experience, and at first, when you started saying about it terrifies and it needs to be contained and it's this wilderness, part of me went, oh no, don't go down that route, you know, because see what we've done with the world. We've tamed wild wilderness and what a mess we've made of it, you know. So I was really pleased to hear that took you to, you know, it's the mystery, it's the because for me, what I hear, and it's our connection to the other, you know, the joy of being out in the mountains and how it lifts us up rather than scares us away, you know, that sense of connectedness. So yeah, because while you were speaking there at the end, I just wrote down for myself how you know, the sublime can only be an experience. It's not something that we can know. And then I hear you say almost identical, those words came in from yourself as well. So, you know, I've got no question, but I just want to, show me appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you very much. And that's exactly what the objective of the book and this project was, is to show that, you know, the sublime does not be this sort of extraordinary, terrifying, dreadful sort of experience that, you know, it can paralyze us, but then we master it cognitively, like Kant, you know, assumes, and that makes us feel superior over, you know, nature, over our own emotions, our own sort of embodied subjectivity in a way. But actually, how it can be an opportunity for connectivity, for intersubjectivity, for connection with nature, with connection with the other, instead of something that separates us and makes us feel superior.
Yeah, I know, because also I appreciate how you bring it into practice, because where I've arrived at is the struggle of actually letting go of our knowing, of our theory, of our seeing the patient, the client as a particular condition, you know. And also, you know, my own beating myself up that I'm sitting there thinking about a shopping list, you know, I'm feeling guilty, you know, that I haven't heard what the client said, but then I wonder what's this shopping list, you know. So I really appreciate that it's you know, to really bring it into that practice as well is so important, you know. So
I think these moments, you know, we might think as dissociative ourselves, so a sense of bringing us out, they can always be so informative about how come. Is it something about the encounter that takes us out of it, or is it something that actually is coming in and we might need to share, you know, in this moment, and something might come out of it in this moment of, you know, relative disclosure. It's not about this. About I keep having this, you know, I keep hearing this song in my head what this is about. Does it bring something to you? Does it remind you something? You know, and of course it needs to be done tactfully and carefully. Yeah, but I think it can be quite an opening of something. An opening of something that for sometimes it gets you out of the impasse of someone's sort of life and repetition, endless repetition of the same. Something new can, an opening to something new and an opening to another, as well as another perspective or another human being or a natural sort of, right? Thank you, Tia. That was very helpful. Thank
you. Jacqueline.
Yes, I so agree with Theo. Thank you so much, Anastasios. And I was having a different reaction. I was really feeling so sleepy. I thought, I'm going to fall asleep when you were talking about the classical view of the sublime, you know, and likening it to a trauma, you know, and it had to be contained. And I was, and then suddenly, you know, when you changed and brought it back to the everyday, I woke up, and it was, and since then I've just thought of, you know, examples in my own head, and it's been like sparks of illumination, you know, and it was just those moments of grace, and they're not, I don't know when they're coming, you know, they're unforeseen, just and can come from the other or something other than one's own thought processes. Just you see something in a different way, as you say, you know, reframe it, but it's just shifts something. Yeah. So thank you so much. It was just really helpful, and I feel so much more awake. You know, it's almost like I've got sparks in my own head. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Jacqueline. I think there is definitely what you say. There's something about these moments of grace, or something that comes and, you know, illuminates and opens something up, and it happens. They are so precious, you know, as well, because they are outside of our control. They're mysterious. They come out of nowhere almost. But they do come, and you open yourself up to them. They come even more often.
And then the change remains. You know, although the spark just happens in that transient moment, the reframing remains. Yes,
the reframing remains. That's true. And like that moment I described with this old lady that came, and I mean, that reframing remains.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, what's just happened here?
Yeah.
And this is, you know, something that was very precious and very important. I will never forget. And the moment with Tessa on the road, I mean, I could never see roadworks, you know, like before. I mean, I look at them very differently.
Yeah.
It's almost like, it's like a gaze, the aesthetic gaze, the gaze that, of course, there are problems with that sometimes. Sometimes if we start seeing anything as beautiful, then we stop seeing what is ugly as well, you know. You know, so we need to be careful there about the ideological functions. But I think there is something about the aesthetic gaze of the world, how you see, how it can transform the world into something that can be, you know, it's a form of enchantment again, you know, making something sacred again. I know it sounds religious, but there is something about sacralizing what is become disenchanted and completely sort of robbed of its aura. And I think there is something about that can, you know, if you look in the world through the aesthetic, the gaze of Tessa was so wonderful, because, you know, all of a sudden, because he was having these moments all the time, he was really surprised by them. And I think, oh my God, you know, actually, if I start seeing the world through this gaze, something else will emerge. You know, so not simply the dreariness, the functionality, the instrumentality, but something else. And of course, you know, we also need to be careful not to take it to, well, it's only a matter of perspective, right? Of course, there is also real sort of suffering there that needs to be addressed.
Vanessa?
Yes, hello. Thank you, Anastasios. That was delightful and gave us perhaps that pleasure of feeling a moment of feeling in the sublime as you see something and connect with what you're bringing us as well, that difference. I bring, because I'm late into this world of psychotherapy, a background in science and mathematics.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if there isn't the division that you were giving at the beginning between the aesthetic and almost the work of the mind and being terribly logical, that there is an experience when you're doing mathematics of actually the sublime, when you're
Yes.
holding lots of unknown.
Mm.
And you hold the unknown for quite sometimes a significant period of time. And then suddenly things begin to coalesce. And the creativity that there is in mathematics and science, I think, is so easily pushed away by people's experience of it being terribly logical all the time, that it's easy to miss that in science, you're often holding the unknown quite comfortably. And I wonder if that isn't something that happens even within the consulting room, that we are holding the unknown and we're comfortable in holding that space, ready for the moments of the sublime. And I'm wondering, is there any way that you get a sense of whether you might have been doing that for the clients that you talk about, that you're comfortable holding the unknown for them?
Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm always comfortable, but but certainly the holding the unknown, the holding the hope. I always think that in moments of despair we become custodians of hope. And that hope, of course, is an unknown. Is something that can be a very kind of weak, not a strong hope, but a weak inkling of hope. But still, you need to hold it for them until they're able to hold it for themselves and to allow it to grow. But it's very interesting you mentioned about mathematics, because one of the chapters is about mathematics in the book. It's about someone teaching mathematics in the class, and the encounter they have with exactly what you said about the unknown, and how the students process that, and the encounter between the teacher and the pupils within the mathematics class. So it's very, and of course one of the definitions of the sublime, I mean the classical, is about the encounter with the infinite, the infinite number. I mean the vastness of that, and how do you conceptualize it? It's not able to conceptualize.
And yet mathematicians play with it on the page easily.
Yes, it's an everyday ordinary sort of way of going about. It's not something extraordinary.
We can take a geometry and hold infinity and talk about it with ease.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
So Theo, go on.
Yeah, can I just add to that, Vanessa, that the interesting thing, of course, is that Dion was a mathematician as well. He came up with this really complex grid of the personality and interventions, etc., which he, towards the end of his life, let go of almost, and opened up to the mystery in terms of starting to write about which of course is in a way it's like another word for the infinite. I fully appreciate that there's something about not to make those kind of rigid divisions about heart is good, mind is bad, etc. So it can be found everywhere, I think.
Absolutely. But you see, this is where I think that there is that sense of if anything, psychoanalysis is this sort of the reconnection of mind, the body, and mind, body, and other, and through the presence of another. And I think this is how we come back to our bodies, through another mind and another body. and I think this is where I think the aesthetic experience is very important here, because it's about it's not simply about words, it's about the sensuous presence, you know, how our senses, and I'm talking about all senses here, interact in this sort of sense of with another in the room. How they you know, and of course you don't need to be even if it is about touch, you don't need to be touched to feel the presence of another, physically touched, of course, but there is something about touch, taste, you know, the sense of vision, hearing, smell, everything, you know, is present in the psychoanalytic movement. That embodiment, in a way, comes, you know, is not simply expressed through words, but also, you know, in the gaps between words and in the silences and in these moments of grace that come out of nowhere and can have a kind of amorphous sensuous experience, but still, you know, still can be simply a sound that you hear from outside the room that makes something, you know, present within, and opens something up. So I also want to introduce, you know, the various senses that take place within this intersubjective encounter in a way that open up a different sort of dimension, which is not included only within words, but also between words and beyond words too.
Can I ask something? I was very struck, Anastasios, by your phrase "moments of grace," and which I felt that you were able to describe, I suppose, rather beautifully, really. But I was just interested in the choice of that word "grace," which obviously comes, I guess, with a lot of its own associations. And
yes,
what I suppose what you're feeling about that word is and your choice of it, and
for me, you know, I think like with Bjorn as well, and there is a lot of the religious experience, but how you secularize within the psychoanalytic context. And I think grace for me comes from this religious background, but you know, it points to the moment of anotherness, which is not something you can know, you can understand, or is something that is more than you can comprehend, but still you have to, this form of emptying yourself up in order to receive it. It's a form of, you know, we have in Greek sort of theology, there is the word of kenosis, of how you empty yourself. There's a process of emptying, you know, emptying yourself up in order to receive something that is beyond what you can, you know, what you know, what you understand, and this otherness that comes, which is beyond description, beyond understanding, and I think this is the otherness that comes from the, you know, from the client, the otherness that comes from the space of the third, almost, that is created between the two participants and is introduced. But you need to empty yourself in order to be able to decreate yourself in order to create something. To decreate, I mean, there's a form of decreation in order to be a form of recreation. If you are, and that's how I view it. And I think what the experience of love, what it does, is a form of, you know, is a form of unsettling, is a form of taking away your own sort of, you have to decreate yourself in order to allow the other to be present in their own right, instead of putting yourself there in your own sort of, constantly your own needs, your own I need, I want, I feel. Well, wait a minute, what about the other? And this is where I think this is the moment of sublimity, a moment of decreation in order to receive something. And that I see that as you know, a circular process, but I think in many ways, you know, what aesthetics serves, you know, the materiality of the body and the aesthetics of the embodiment that we experience, what it serves with religious experience is exactly, you know, the sense of materiality, which in its connection with something more.
Thank you. I was just reminded there of the way Christopher Bolas writes about the receptive unconscious.
Yeah.
How that, I guess, connects to what you're talking about those moments of decreation and there being the possibility of something being received on that level.
I remember because I also read a lot of Simone Weil, who is and that's where my inspiration comes in terms of this, you know, the moments of grace. Her book was Grace and Gravity, you know. She's a religious thinker, but you know, for these purposes, we don't need to think of this as a kind of divine or godlike. But you know, I don't mind if someone thinks in these terms too. I mean, but there is something about, you know, her book of Grace and Gravity, and she describes, you know, when you are in love, you know, in love you have to do what costs you the most. Not what you're gonna gain, but will cost you the most. And actually that was an encounter she had with one of the students, said, I'm in love with this, I don't know what to do. But you have to do what will cost you the most. And I think that's the moment of the creation, in order to receive the other. And I think that's difficult, it's not easy. I mean, we are, you know, we are very narcissistically invested in our projects. We can't just recreate ourselves so easily.
Just wanted to see whether that there might be thoughts, comments, questions from anyone who hasn't spoken yet in the discussion. So you're very welcome to speak if you would like to.
Okay.
Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
Hello. I really love the idea of the sublime, and I think I search for it everywhere in my everyday life. And I think it is when, you know, the occasions when I feel it has happened, that it is something about how I am in a place to receive it. And, you know, in my therapy, whether that is when, you know, we're in a reverie and I am in a place to really receive the other, my therapist, and then I hear something or something feels differently to me. And you know, the one example I can think of was following the death of my father and being at his graveside, and a woman appearing from nowhere and coming to talk to me. But you know, that's will always stay with me, that memory, you know, her few kind words. But obviously I was there and I was wanting something.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there is something that comes from within that somehow gets communicated as well. You know, to be able to receive, to you know, for it then to come as well. So yeah. But I think it's so important.
Yes.
But no, I've really enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I think for me that also, again, you know, bringing what you said, I remember I lost, you know, I lost a very good friend, Tessa, and it's very interesting that, you know, her wishes was to be buried too, so we buried her in Whitstable here, and you know, by coincidence, next to the grave there is this sort of this bench, and that was dedicated to, you know, a young man who died very, you know, in his 20s, and he said, you know, to Michael, an intrepid time traveler. And you know, for me, I don't know, it just, you know, I always, just opened for me this sort of possibility of, of Tessa, this intrepid time traveler, can come, later on, however many years later. And actually, one of the chapters she left unfinished, and I had to finish it for her in order to include it in the book. And I also put a kind of introduction to our relationship and how it came about. So it felt like a kind of, she's an intrepid time traveler because she traveled and she made her presence felt again in the book. And she travels through me and through her presence again in other people's lives, and these are the moments of grace, I think, moments that we need, and we open ourselves up, and they seem coincidental, but actually I'm not so sure they are.
Yeah, Holly, go ahead.
Hiya. Thank you. Firstly, I'm very much at the beginning of my journey of psychoanalytic world, so some things do go over my head, but I'm happy to try and learn. I guess I have a question. You said that the book was published just before the pandemic, and we're talking about finding the sublime in the everyday. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about, obviously, the stress that has affected society and living in a state of unknown, but the more darker unknown. Just your thoughts about how the challenges of connecting with that sublime in the everyday may have been impacted by this societal situation that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. If you live in times of extreme anxiety and death and darkness around you everywhere, it's very difficult to see any signs of hope. There is a lot of despair and a lot of sense of. And I was speaking to Stephen before, and I just realized, how, I'm fully invested in my private practice, but I never thought that I would get 40 referrals in the space of 3 months, and it's extraordinary. I never had such an experience before. And it shows how much people are, the one, the cracks have opened, and it's very difficult. The despair has settled in, and it's very difficult to find moments of reprieve and to see the sublime every day, when there's so much despair around. However, even in moments of despair, there are glimmers of hope and glimmers of connectivity that come out of our everyday encounters with others, that go hand in hand with this. And this is my hope, that my hope doesn't come out of neglecting the despair, by the way. There is this beautiful writer called Jillian Rose. She was the sister of Jacqueline Rose, and she was a philosopher, and she wrote The Works of Love. It was one of her last book before she died from cancer. And she writes in this, she starts the book by saying, keep your mind in hell and don't despair. That's the challenge. How do you keep your mind in hell and don't despair?
Yeah.
And the two are equally important. How don't avoid looking at hell, not being in denial, but at the same time, not despair. And it's very difficult. Very difficult. And how you, in these moments when you don't despair, you allow for something new to emerge. When the despair rules and this darkness takes over.
Thank you.
I suppose listening to both your talk and all the comments, I was just struck by the presence of thinking around loss, perhaps in this theme, really, and maybe there's a particular way in which experiences of loss can create those kinds of openings that you're talking about sometimes. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, experiences of loss can definitely, create these openings, create something. In many ways, can leave us, can leave us indifferent to the world, or can engage us even more with it. It depends on the experience of it and how we process it. Yeah.
So we just have the last few minutes. So I don't know whether any final thoughts that people would like to say, or Anastasios, whether there's anything that you want to.
Well, I really very much enjoyed this morning, and also all your contributions, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here and sharing with me these sublime moments and your sublime experiences as well. So I very much appreciate it. And, it was great to be able to share also my work and my thinking and my experience, both in life and in psychoanalytic work.
I was thinking about lockdown and how something that's been important for me has been a more or less daily walk. And actually, in my case, that takes me to the sort of the nearest green space, I suppose, that I have is a cemetery. And it's actually very nicely laid out. It's got lots of mature trees. There are a few sort of slightly wilder areas, but it's basically pretty well looked after. But it also has quite a lot of birds there, really. So kind of it's had real aesthetic moments, I think, in that space, and has helped me cope with all the restrictions and the limitations of life in lockdown. Yeah, Katerina, final thought maybe. Can you unmute? Yes,
Thank you, Anastasios, for your talk. It was really inspiring. I just, after listening to all your comments, I was actually thinking about, especially in relation to the lockdown experience, how working with patients sometimes, for me at least, it was almost like looking at a landscape when, especially when we were deprived of actually changing images and sort of moving to other places. I had this thought that now this is my landscape. This is where I can travel. So it can almost be an aesthetic experience, sort of meeting with someone else's mind, either through reverie, which actually today just made so much sense, that reverie is not only a containing function, but it's also a moment of sublimation.
Yeah.
But yes, I just had this thought that the unconscious as a landscape with the scenery, the changing scenery, that you can almost have an aesthetic pleasure that you can take out of that.
Absolutely, Katerina. Thank you. It was nice to see you again, by the way.
Yes,
and
same.
Yes, I think you're right. But I think this landscape, we are not simply observers, but co-creators. With our own unconscious. I think we are creating the landscape together in a way, creating a kind of complex sort of landscape painting, if you want, where there are people who are like a squiggle here, here and there and there and there, creating this, and in that moment of there are moments that come from outside and moments come from in between, and they enlarge the glass game and make it this sort of, hopefully, exquisite creation, and aesthetically sort of rewarding. Yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, working with, in many ways, my clients, my patients help me keep my sanity in this moment, as well as they help me as much as I help them.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a note on which we will finish. So yeah,
thanks very much for everyone, and we will circulate a digital feedback form through Eventbrite. Please fill your comments, and we really need your feedback. And thanks a lot, and we will circulate this recording maybe in 2 hours.
Okay.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anastasios.
Very much, Anastasios.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.